Hey, FCBC family, it's Pastor Mike here. It is time, once again, for empowering conversations with my friends, the crew, Reverend Alicia Gordon. All right.
Hey.
All right. That's cute. And Dr. Maurice Wallace.
What up, people?
What's going on, fam? Listen, we're so happy to be with you all again. Last week we had a great time, and I know we're going to have a great time this week. Just want to give you a heads up. Some of you may be coming over from Facebook to our website and to YouTube. We don't know what's going on, why it's not showing on Facebook. So we're going to get some people saying, Pastor, I can't see it. Okay, go to the website. And hopefully, well, first of all, you can't see it if you're not watching Facebook. So
it's a conspiracy.
Scratch that. Yeah, it's a conspiracy. So we want to make sure that you tell your friends who may be saying, we can't see Empowering Conversations on Facebook. Go to FCBCNYC.org. Go to YouTube and go to our YouTube page, FCBCNYC. But for those who are watching right now, welcome. We're so glad to have you. We're going to get right into it tonight. Empowering conversations that awaken the conscience today. And as you know, we like to talk about, what's at the political cusp right now, what is current, what is critical, and we just don't do it. And then we just generally have a good time. As you can see, the three of us have a good time together. But we want to jump into what is pressing right now. Right now, beginning on last night, Russia began the invasion of Ukraine. Now, for a lot of people, they've been wondering, why is this critical? Why is it important? Why is it such a focal point? But more importantly, why should we be interested? And we're going to have Dr. Maurice start us off tonight. Why is this Russia-Ukraine issue so important? It's been on the television since last night. Every outlet has been covering it. Why is it critical that we pay attention to this issue, you think?
Yeah, I think it's an essential issue for us, though it seems so distant. It seems so far removed from us. But I want to remind us all that in the first place, we are world citizens, right?
Absolutely.
And we have as much at stake as the rest of the world. Now, we can pretend and imagine that we are insulated from all of this conflict that's happening in a far away land, we like to tell ourselves. But here's what's important about Russia and Ukraine. There's not only a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but there is also a kind of new solidarity, a strengthening solidarity between Russia and China.
There we go. There we go.
And so we have to understand that relationship has the capacity to shift the axis of power in Europe and Asia, right? And so if that happens, then America's got to respond somehow, right? It's gonna affect us one way or another. It may or may not direct us in any direct military way, but it's certainly going to be a change in the ways that we operate as an international economy, as a national economy. And these are things that I think we have to be vigilant about and prepare ourselves for. As I said, we are citizens of the world. We are an essential part of this nation's economy, and what affects this nation's economy is necessarily going to affect us. And can I add just one more thing? Heaven forbid, but if something happens to Biden,
Turmoil. What you say is important. Well, let me back up. Part of the challenge in this moment for many people in America wrapping their heads around this issue is because our media outlets are top-heavy, which rightfully so to a degree, on domestic concerns. Yeah. We do not necessarily focus on foreign policy or foreign affairs because we still operate in the mentality that we're not directly or immediately connected with global issues. The world is small right now.
It is.
It is extremely small. And so as you said, what affects one region affects us. But this is important because there is a nostalgic haze over this country. There are many people in this country, citizens, the average American citizen, who actually still believes that America is the essential superpower, and primarily because of military might.
Yeah.
The problem is that in terms of economic stability, we're not the superpower.
Yep.
And we don't get that. China dominates.
Yeah.
China is the largest debtor in the world right now. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Antigua, and we were on our way back to the airport. And yeah, we was in Antigua, our families, yeah. You got to remind ourselves. and we were taking the car back to the airport, and the driver was talking about how the new cricket stadium they had, the roads, the infrastructure was improving, and Antigua had an amazing airport. And he said China funded all of that.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
All right.
I remember that.
So they're dominating spaces we know in Africa that doesn't get talked about.
That's right.
The Caribbean and America. So much of the global debt is held by China.
Yeah.
Right? Now, why did you bring that up? Why is it important? We had this conversation earlier. Putin said he had 200,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. But in order to get 200,000 troops on the border of Ukraine, he pulled troops from the Chinese-Russian border. How do you pull troops away and feel comfortable doing that? It is not that there's a partnership per se, but there I'm convinced there's an alliance there with this respect. The desire to expose America's diminishing global power. Period. You know, that's what I think is one of the things. How do you feel about this, Alicia?
You know, one of the things that, full transparency, I'm probably, like many people, trying to figure out what does all of this mean. But one of the things that has been coming up over and over in my timelines is the human impact, right, of people, of families, of children, of civilians on the ground, right? And what does it mean to live in what can be a war-torn country, right? And what does that mean as a global citizen to think about refugees, right? We think about every time these moments happen in the world, America, there's always this divide of those who, we want to lean into this mystique of, accepting all people, but there's always this like political conversation about what does that look like, what's the impact on the economy. But I think one of the things that I am most concerned about is human civilians on the ground. What does this mean for those people, for children who have to live, who may lose their lives as a result of this? And so this is something that even if you don't fully understand the complexities of the war between those two countries, we should be very mindful about how we offer aid, right? How we talk about the war. If you are not as well versed, how do we talk about it in meaningful ways, giving ground to people who are on the ground, being able to inform the stories, right? And I appreciate you bringing up the media because it's so, I had to turn off US-based media today.
That's right.
I started watching the BBC, I started watching other outlets because I needed to diversify the messaging that was there. And it was very stark about what was the conversation on the ground if you were based in another country, right? Yeah. We were very much, talking about Biden and, the kind of political structures, and others were really focused on telling these really compelling stories about people who were in subways in Ukraine that have kind of been a haven for people who are leaving their homes and looking for somewhere to go, right? And so that's what's most meaningful to me, and that I'm trying to keep my eye on, and really thinking about when the time comes, because it's going to come, how do we respond with our pockets? How do we respond with our resources? How do we respond to ensure that people have safe haven here?
Well, I think a lot of it is we use this language of casualties of war. But that language, as you say, Alicia, doesn't get to the lives lost, right? Casualties of war sounds, it's kind of it disconnects human beings from the atrocities, right? And I think as you raise the issue, I looked at video footage of the long lines at supermarkets in Ukraine, people trying to get out of certain cities, people fearful of what might happen. We've seen images now of the bombing, the destruction already that has taken place. And we know people have lost their lives, right? And while we often, politically, we have the conversation up here, but we miss the tragedy on the ground level, right?
Yeah. I think, too, it's important to remind ourselves that the experience of insecurity is existential.
That's
nearly,
good.
right? And we feel it in our bodies. It has all sorts of effects. We feel it in our minds. It has all sorts of effects. So this isn't just a political issue that is disembodied. It is not abstract. This has real world material, flesh and blood consequences. And we know something about insecurity. We live through insecurity. And so it ought to be a concern of ours wherever we find the world sort of feeling in a way kind of insecure, for lack of a better word, right? Precarious, where conditions are precarious, because it has not just immediate personal effects, it's got generational effects.
You know, I think about, one of the things I often think about in these moments is the perceived, and I alluded to it earlier, the perceived illusion of American superiority because of democracy, right? And one of the things that we can't forget is that inherent to this democracy is deeply embedded hypocrisy, right? So you think about 2020, when there was so much protest in reaction to George Floyd, which the protest was in reaction to a lot of things, but it became global protest. And what people miss is that, what I realize in conversation, is that a lot of the protests that broke out globally was not just in solidarity with black people in the United States. It was also in opposition to the hypocrisy inherent in the democracy of this country. So it wasn't just solidarity, it was also protests against the ways and the mechanisms of this country with regard to issues of race. But that happens around the globe. And I tell people, you may not know the intricate details of why so many countries despise our country. But what we can't assume, what we can't do is romanticize the narrative as though there's no culpability on our part. And that may be why there's not a focus on foreign policy or foreign affairs, because it's complicated. It's complicated. The role that America has played in coups around the world, in destabilizing economies around the world. I mean, we don't talk about that. We don't hear conversations about that. And it's, look, I stand here as a U.S. citizen and proud of it. But being a U.S. citizen does not mean I put on blinders to the reality of our practices. In fact, you know, we love Baldwin. And Baldwin, it's because you love this country that you have that you have to critique it. You have to be honest about it. You cannot live in an illusion, right, that will die and make you look really as though you are culpable in the insanity that takes place in this country.
There's a certain, as you say, there's a certain hypocrisy, a certain double standard. And we seem only willing to look at ourselves in the most flattering light. We are incapable, it seems, of self-critique.
Oh, God.
And if we can't self-critique, then we can't improve who we are. We can't even guarantee a secure future if we don't allow ourselves to have a set of principles that we are going to live by at all costs. I think that's fundamental. And I also think it's a brilliant idea, Alicia, for all of us to practice moving to a different platform every now and then, right? Because we can easily get caught up in a kind of self-congratulation when we look at our network news especially, which is only going to show the United States in the most heroic light and not betray some of the dirt that we have done, perhaps dirt we're doing, that is kept hidden from view, because to expose it is to expose hypocrisy. So I love that you did that. I think it's a great exercise for many of us to begin to practice.
And I like that. And that's why I like our format and our conversations, because you know, we're free in the sense of we don't have to play the politics in conversation. And in fact, you know, this may sound the wrong way. You know, a lot of times we forget that network news, right? People are playing character roles. A role.
They're playing a role.
That it's not about the dissemination of information. People play a role, you know, and unfortunately, that's how news, that's the conduit
Well, that's how the former president could stay in the news every day.
Every day.
To act out that character, which may or may not be entirely him, but the fact is that's all we know. Because that's what the news has provided us.
And as despicable as it was to some people, it was good for ratings.
Absolutely.
And it was good TV.
And it made a lot of money off of it.
And it made a lot of money, and it was sensationalism at its best. And that's where we have to be careful in these issues. How the narrative is nuanced, but through sensational lenses, right? And even in this moment with Russia-Ukraine, and I think, the one thing I want to say, I guess we shift, is that it is important that we are mindful of what goes on in geopolitical matters. I said it already. The world is smaller day by day. Points of contact are more immediate than they were a generation ago. And we can no longer sit as though, this don't affect us. I'll give you a classic example before we shift. And I'll be honest, and I think all of us have experienced this in some way. There was a moment, Alicia, where we would see television shots of people in China wearing masks. Yep. And we would be like,
why they got these masks on?
They've been at it for a minute.
For a long
time.
Because they were impacted by realities that we were not familiar with.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we became the thing we made fun of. Yep. Right? And now, now it makes sense. Now, you're going to take a lot to take a mask off my face at this point.
And let me add to that. Let me add a layer to that. I'm on Twitter real big, and there was a woman who lived in China somewhere, and she made the same critique. It was like, as a culture, we have been wearing masks for a very long time, but the layer she added to was that as a cultural norm, they wear masks even when they have a cold. Because the culture is that we are very mindful of how my presence has an impact on the presence of someone else.
Oh my God.
Right? Which is something on the Western side of the world that we don't even understand, right? Because of individualism.
Yeah, I'm about to say the rugged individualism, the infectious and dysfunctional individualism that we don't think about the other person. And that's why the argument around the mask is so important. It's not about you. It's about those around you. And our individualism really undermines our greatest aspirations politically and communally. And so, I think, as I said, the world is smaller, and we have to pay attention. It's not enough when you watch the news, and after they get past what's happening locally, well, let's turn it. I don't want to hear about what's going on in Russia. No, it's important. And if you don't understand it, check out the cost of gas tomorrow. Watch the price of gas tomorrow. That oil is now $100 a barrel. So if you don't think there's a direct impact, look at the Dow Jones today. Look at the stocks plummeting. It has a direct impact. We don't realize how much Russia is a source for oil in this world, right? And so we see it. So, sanctions, yes, but America is going to be pulled in. If you just saw, 7,000 U.S. troops have been sent to Eastern Europe to help fortify, right? So we're going to get drawn in some way, shape, or form. And so, Look, folks, we need to pay attention to this. Don't turn off the TV, but read the articles. Inform yourself about what's going on so that when we get hit with some potentially catastrophic news, we don't say, well, how did this happen? And when did this take place? Keep track of it. And speaking of how the potential hypocrisy that's inherent in our democracy, we just had something that took place in Brunswick, Georgia, your state. With the Ahmaud Arbery case, we know that the father, the son, and the friend, the three men were found guilty. But there was a recent victory where they were found guilty of a federal hate crime by the Department of Justice, prosecuted the case. Now, the interesting thing about this story, why it's important, is because the three men were ready to make a plea deal. Plead guilty, but a deal was going to be struck. The DOJ wanted to do the plea deal. Right? But the family of Ahmaud Arbery, his mother and father in particular, said, no, let's go to trial. Now, that was a very powerful stance they took, given the fact of how hard it is to prosecute federal hate crimes, how hard it is to get a guilty verdict in that regard. And they said, let's move forward. And they were found guilty, right? So what does that what does that say to you when you think about that, Alicia, when you hear that these men, and again, they were found guilty of a federal hate crime? What does that say to you? being a Georgian.
Being a Georgian. You know, I think it's important for people to situate this contextually about where Brunswick, Georgia is. It is not Atlanta. It is not Metro Atlanta. It is not, you know, home of Braves caps and Super Bowls and all that. This is a very rural, small, white, southern, conservative city, right? And as we know, juries are often made up of the you know, the pool of people who live there. And so I think it's important to situate this victory, as we're often talking about it, in the context of where it's happening in this community, where that type of racial charged encounters for black folks who live are an everyday thing, right? And it's not what we often see as a Southerner in a very implicit, you know, bless your heart kind of way. It is very explicit, right? And so for this kind of judgment to come down on this in this particular trial in that context, it says something. It does send a signal, and I think it does set a precedence. But obviously, we don't want to hang our laurals, right, on things like that.
So
well, you know,
I want to hear you on this.
I'm curious about this because it's Brunswick. Is that Brunswick? Obviously, is not Minneapolis.
Correct.
And so I wonder about the degree to which Americans imagine that Brunswick is so far off the beaten path, let's say, of the American mainstream, right? It's rural. It's you know, not a major urban environment. Maybe the thought is that the country is willing to sacrifice.
Wait a minute.
Some folks who are not a part of
the mainstream.
The mainstream in traditional ways, right? And I just, you know, I wonder if that's what's necessary to preserve the pretense of national justice, right? That every now and then, some white people themselves are going to have to be sacrificed in the interest of this larger, this larger facade of liberty and justice for all.
That's good.
Let me just put that in for a second. Let me get that in. Let me get a sip of water on that one. That was serious.
That's good.
No, it's worth thinking about. But it's also, you know what I also think about this case? I find the decision of Ahmaud Arbery's family to proceed with this case with no guarantees. In fact, with the odds against them
that's right.
that there's going to be a conviction. But they proceeded on principle. And here's what I think I admire about that. They must have thought that there's no outcome that's going to revive their son.
Yes.
Which meant they were willing to risk it.
Which meant they were willing to risk it. These men have already been found guilty of a criminal
They're going to jail.
offense. They're going to jail, right? Now, on principle, in a certain way, as painful as it is, I am sure, for them, if they win, terrific. But if they lose, they actually underscore how far we really are from all of the claims of justice that we hold so dear as a country. In other words, it seems to me that the case is so egregious that if these men are not found guilty of committing a federal crime, then who can possibly be
found guilty,
of a federal crime?
Yeah. I was on a radio show and I heard a woman call in and she said that, you know, that they wanted to make an agreement and a plea deal, and I think the system is designed to work against us. And I had to say, hold on, not necessarily so. The judge said, let's honor the request of the family. The Department of Justice said, let's take the plea deal. And the thing was, this is why you say it's so profound. The plea deal was that they would be guilty. And they said, no, we want to go through the process.
Yes.
We want to go through the process. And it's something, but I can't let you off the hook there, bro, because
all right.
you dropped the bomb in here. This idea that, and I want to say this, and I want people to hear it clearly, the idea that the infrastructure of whiteness does not mind making a sacrifice
out of their own.
Out of their own to maintain the illusion of justice.
Yes. Yes.
That's so good, and you haven't said it yet, but I think too, because when we talk about white supremacy and whiteness and this pecking order, right, that poor white people often believe that they are a part of a grander work, right? That the issues that matter to poor and marginalized Black and brown people don't apply to them, right? But I think exactly this is what happens, right? And it's a reality check for, I imagine, for many of those who are in that community. But I just love what you said, is because they were willing to sacrifice them, to make an example out of them.
Now, we can't say possibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yes.
Because don't want nobody to walk away, because they'll say, well, Reverend Leisha said that's why they did it.
Don't
we
do that
put up
to me.
a theory.
We theorizing.
We theorizing. Don't say that why, because somebody going to take that and be like, Reverend Leisha said that this is what they doing. Because you know how we like to do. We take a piece of a story and make it a whole. No. But it's a powerful theory, because let me tell you why. If we had time, historically, you can mark moments where this theory actually applies.
Yep.
We don't mind giving y'all a little bit here and here. Take this to maintain the larger system.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Doctor, you
listen. Dr. King said this. He said that when he was being jailed, they'd have conversations with the jailers. And he wanted to point out to them that some of them needed to be marching in the interest of civil rights themselves, because they were themselves exploited. They were themselves being taken advantage of by power. And if you had a clear sense of what was happening, he tried to convey to those jailers, you would be praying with us. You would be marching with us. Yeah, I think that is an historical pattern.
That's good. And it feeds and feasts on the myth of racial superiority, right? You know, I always tell everybody, I'm a cinephile. You remember that movie, The Free State of Jones? I loved how that movie opened up, right? Matthew McConaughey was in it. But if you remember, there were a bunch of Confederate soldiers sitting around the campfire. And they were mad because they said, this is the rich man's war. Because remember, during that, the persons who had their land confiscated for the sake of the Confederacy were poor whites. Large plantation owners were not touched. In fact, large plantation owners' sons did not have to go to war for the Confederacy. So that and in that movie, you saw an alliance between runaway slaves, free slaves, and poor whites. And poor whites. And there was even a scene where one of the white, and I also had Confederate soldiers who had run away from war, where there was a scene when they were eating, and he tried to maintain a pecking order of white folk being to eat before blacks. Right. And the person, Matthew McConaughey's character, and basically comes and kills it. Because what he says is that they are all in the same state. It is the class piece in this country that, to me, is the real citadel of white supremacy. That is it. It is, and the tragedy is that many public critiques lack a class analysis. Because we love celebrating going after the low-hanging fruit, which is racial injustice, and it's real.
Absolutely.
But it is a class critique, and I have to say that as a transition point, because, we're New Yorkers, and so we have to talk about New York politics. Y'all didn't notice that if you watch it, when I said that, Alicia grabbed her card real quick, said, I'm ready to go now, I'm ready to work, right? Because we got out, listen, and I don't want to make it seem like we're attacking, but there's some people just give you too much to work with, right? And our mayor, right? We talked about this last week, but again, it's not attack, but it's being consistent. We critique everybody. You don't leave people out of the critique if you're being consistent, right? And talk to us, Alicia, about the issues that have recently come out around three. We'll begin this conversation around three areas in New York City. One, the homelessness issue. Two, the school cuts. In the school budget, cuts in school budget proposed by the mayor. And then lastly, which some people don't understand fully, but the appointment of a clergy who is perceived as homophobic as a senior faith advisor. So let's talk about the homelessness piece, because this is the class piece.
Yes.
Because I think that well, I'll let you share the story.
Yeah. Let me frame it with the story. About 5 days ago, a story came out about a young, a 63-year-old. Young.
That's young.
Yeah, it is young.
Let me tell you why that's young. When you cross 50, 60s is young. So you ain't crossed that plane
You're
yet.
right.
We ain't understand that.
Listen,
let me
know
say,
now.
there's a lot of folk watching who are seeing. When you've come of a certain age, when you hear somebody pass away, and say, well, how old was she? 69? Oh, she was so young. Because I remember when we was in our 20s, 40 was old.
Right.
But now when you cross 50,
Yes, sir.
she was so young.
Yeah.
She was 63.
Really
63 years old, Audrey Loomer, she was found dead on
White
the
woman.
train. White woman who
It's
was
important.
found dead on a train covered in bed bugs. She was evicted out of her apartment in 2018. And was not able to get back on her feet. She was a gig worker, driving, doing things like that. She was utilizing public assistance, but it was never enough for her to have enough money to pay rent. So she was found dead on a train. And I think this context around class is really important, right? Because and kind of going back to this media portrayal around class, some outlets were talking about her and very much naming about the type of animals she lived with, cats, and the type of work that she had been in, and calling her an amateur artist and all of those things, and very much trying to paint this picture that her ultimate demise had a lot to do with things that were really one had nothing to do with her outcomes, right? But really trying to paint the picture that people who are experiencing homelessness have a litany of things that ultimately contribute to that, and that's really not it, right? What's really it is that we are living in a world, in a city, where even when someone faces eviction, even when they are trying to pull themselves up by working, gig working, whatever, even when they still have access to things like social safety nets, it is still not enough to ensure that you can experience the basic right of housing, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was looking through several articles, and there was a quote that our mayor said about homeless people on the trains, unhoused people on the trains, and our governor talking about, the 1,000 people who alleged 1,000 people who are often on our trains trying to find shelter, how they're going to activate the police and mental health workers to bring those people off of the train and get them all these things. And our mayor said, and quote, "The days are over of doing whatever you want. The days are over of doing whatever you want. Those days are over." In response to
On the train.
people being on the train and living on the train and things of that nature. And I think it's so important for us, lest we forget, right, about the very stories that we often use to bring ourselves into positions of power in elections.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, our struggle.
Right, our struggle story.
To come up.
Honey, the single mothers and being in the right. Those are the stories that we use to bypass, right, people in these electoral spaces. We always want to lean in that, but then when we're in office, we actually want to use that same stories to belittle
And punish
people and criminalize them for that same poverty.
That's it.
Watch the line. Watch the line. We've heard it in elections. We heard it in a recent one. But for the grace of God, there go I. But hold on. So where's the grace in that moment? Grace, you can acknowledge grace is what saved, but you can't demonstrate it with the power you have. And hold on, there was something as you're watching. I love being in conversation with you two, because you two have this way of just slipping in these little shots. Or you frame language in a way that just did you hear her little move she made? She said, well, when the mayor talked about homelessness, she said, no, the unhoused.
Yeah.
Wait a minute now.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. That is saying something different.
Yep.
Not the homeless.
Right.
The unhoused.
Yeah. Yep.
No, you gotta say more about that, Alicia, because I want people to hear that homelessness and homeless people at this point come with a whole lot of assumptions
And
associations with homelessness.
That's right.
But it's not when you say the unhoused, it shifts
Yep.
responsibility.
Yep, there it is.
It shifts responsibility because here it is. Well, if you're homeless, you know, I get what you do.
Right.
Well, clearly it's something you're missing.
Yep.
But in a country that claims to be the wealthiest, in a city where we have a billionaire's row,
Yep.
and buildings that have entrances for those, this is no exaggeration, separate entrances for those who live in rent-stabilized apartments in certain buildings in this city.
Wow.
The language of unhoused says something. It is not just a personal crisis.
Yep.
It is not just the fault be put at the feet of those who are quote-unquote homeless. To say that they live in a city where they're unhoused.
Yeah. It's the difference between identifying someone who we can imagine has lost something because of something they did,
Yeah.
as opposed to those who have not been provided for
That's it.
Yes.
when they should have been.
Yes.
And I think that's key. You know, I also want to suggest that that we think about what it would mean if we also shifted the language from homelessness to poverty.
Well, there it is.
Because I can't imagine that the mayor would say such things directly to poor people. That's right. And it's also important because
I want to challenge you on that.
Okay.
I want to challenge you on that.
You
You know I want to challenge you?
Why is that?
You said, you wonder if you said to poor people. The man on TV said low-skilled workers.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I'm standing down. I'm standing down.
Yeah, Doc.
But the kind of elected official we thought we were electing is one that I would have imagined had a little more respect for people in their personhood, right? And I think there's a way in which the language of homelessness, as you said, comes with so much baggage and prejudice and blame and judgment and critique that just to invoke that language
It's problematic, yeah.
brings all of it, and you have to work hard to separate what you mean from all of those associations. And I think it's just important that if the mayor is going to say such a thing about poor people, he needs to go on record and say it about poor people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I like that. Because you know what, as you said that, here's where I'm going to make it, equate the homelessness language. And maybe this is the best way to begin to think about, to help people think about why we should eliminate language. Qualitatively, the way, the assumptions that come with homelessness and the narrative around homelessness is no different than the narrative, which we don't use, around welfare queen. Think about that for a second. It does the same kind of triggering.
Yes.
Because it was a catchphrase at one time politically.
Yeah.
Right? To critique, to condemn poverty. Welfare queens. And the welfare queen, of course, was a black woman with more than 3 children.
That's right.
And who was trying to use the system. Because they didn't want to work. No, that's not the case. That is not the case. And we don't talk enough about, here it is, in our city we talk about violence, homelessness. But we don't talk about poverty. Because poverty, those are the tentacles of poverty.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Those are the tentacles of poverty.
Nor do we talk about the violence visited on the homeless, right? Because here's the thing about the subway matter. There were 8 cases of violence on the subways over the weekend. One case that we know of, that we can verify, involved someone unhoused who may well have had a mental health issue. But we have, the city and the state, have criminalized the so-called homeless and linked them to all of the violence that is happening on the subway system. What about those other 7 cases? Right? Should we imagine that all of that is undertaken by the so-called homeless, by the unhoused, and those who may or may not have mental health issues, right?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's easier to impose these stereotypes.
Yes.
Right? Because when we impose stereotypes that are harmful, like welfare queen, like homeless, when we impose that, it actually eradicates our responsibility for how they got there in the first place, right?
Yep.
And so, and again, for a second week, we're looking at how language is so critical, and I think it's important for people who are watching. You know, you may not be having conversations that are using this type of platform, but it's so important for us to interrogate the language that we use when we talk about matters that are directly linked to poverty, right? Poverty is something that is imposed on people. I can't name one poor person who wants to be there.
Poor. That's right. No. That's right.
Right? Who wants to not have access to health care? Who wants to live in a building where there's black mold growing on the wall? Who wants to live in a building where there's brown, dirty water? No, I don't know one human who wants to live in that condition. So when we talk about matters around poverty and around the unhoused and around people who are reliant on social safety nets, we have to interrogate our own biases, right? Even in this space, right? And be mindful that the people's conditions inside the web of poverty is one that is imposed on folks, not one that they opt into.
And it's the assumptions around the language, right? So think about welfare. Let's go back to the welfare queen, because I'm gonna say this is gonna be personal in this regard. We don't think of the welfare queen as being a college student in college with a child or pregnant. I'm talking about like you. I'm talking about like my wife. That's the image. When I hear low-skilled workers, listen. I was a student at Duke University and working 2 jobs, front desk of a hotel and at Blockbuster Video, right? That is the quote-unquote low-skilled worker.
That's right.
I had a college degree working on a master's. So just to reiterate a point, language.
Yeah.
I know you love this phrase, she said. The interrogation of language.
Yes.
This could take us on a different place, but to be able to interrogate the linguistic assaults we make daily. Recklessly. Destructively.
And I think it's key because we should never assume that these linguistic formulations emerged accidentally.
There you go. Man, see, this is why.
Very intentional.
There are people who are studying this, seeing what kind of effects it has, wanting to sort of produce certain outcomes just by the marshaling of language.
Man, listen. You know what it go, and I this is gonna seem far-fetched, maybe, but there's, how we not just name, but how, now this is taking us to another path, that's your sweet spot, but how we pronounce things. I'm gonna give you an example, right? You know, there was a time when Louis Farrakhan still was extremely controversial in the 80s, right? Especially in the 80s, 70s, 80s, but at its height in the 80s, early 90s. It was amazing how so many white commentators or broadcast would say Farrakhan, or go deeper, Saddam Hussein, right? It was something was there, and it was intentional. You heard how the man pronounced his name. But it was a dismissiveness, a deconstruction. Now, we understand Saddam Hussein. I'm not glorifying that. I'm just saying the intentionality around language pronunciation and what it does and how it works in the psyche, right, of those who look at the world through the gaze of whiteness.
It is designed insult. That trots out the plausible deniability. Right? Oh, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. If you correct me, I'll get it right the next time. You knew what you were doing the first time. It was designed. It was intentional. You're too smart in so many other areas for me to accept that you can be so dumb in this area. So I have to believe that you designed that you intended that.
Right, and to go even further, right, we think about the power of naming. So for you to be intentional about misnaming me, right? Our names, whatever that name is the thing that is able to grab our attention. It is the thing that is able to call our attention away from, right? So there's power in how we say people's names. There's power how we name people. But I don't even want to, something you just said about naming, it's also intentional and it's insidiousness because we do this and then we wrap it up in policy.
Yes. Ooh.
Boy.
Right? We wrap it up in policy. We wrap it up in legal things that now behold people to this misnaming.
Yep.
Right? We behold them to the social and cultural web of poverty that they're in, and then we wrap it up in policy and make it a bill and all that kind of good stuff. And now, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so then when you think about the challenge of undoing words like homelessness or undoing words like welfare queen, right?
Yeah.
It's challenging to undo something like a welfare queen name because it is wrapped up in the very policy work for the last 60 years.
That is so deep. That is so deep because the misnaming, here's what you just told me. You just gave me revelation.
Y'all just find across me. I love this. Go ahead.
What you just taught me was that the misnaming is not designed for personal insult alone.
No, never.
I gotta build, I need this misnaming.
Yes.
So I gotta construct some stuff around it.
Yes.
It may well affect you, but it's not personal.
Not personal.
So here's where we miss it. We will attack the name and not the narrative.
Woo.
May
the Lord watch between me and thee.
we will say, we're not welfare. No.
Wow.
Push deeper.
Yeah.
There's a narrative being constructed to justify policy that has far-reaching and long-term impact beyond the name. Watch this. Because the policy around welfare queen is still in place.
Yeah.
We don't use the phrase no more.
Right.
But it wasn't designed to sustain.
That's right.
It was to crack a door open.
Yeah.
Man, look.
Yeah.
See, y'all done shifted this.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of... let me tell you. Let me calm down for a second. Because these conversations do exactly what tonight was designed. Awaken the conscience.
Yes.
We have to begin to rethink what is handed to us and assess why it is
Not
handed.
the name, it's the narrative.
I was watching a documentary the other day called on Amazon Prime called Facing Ali. And it was about the opponents of Muhammad Ali, who he fought. There were certain ones, like Joe Frazier. It was years ago before they had passed away. Joe Frazier and Ron Lyle and Ernie Shave and all these people, right?
Yeah.
And Ken Norton, right? And Ron Lyle, Terrell was the one who kept saying Cassius. And when they were fighting with Muhammad Ali, kept saying what? Say my name.
Say my name, that's right.
Every blow.
Right.
Say, what's my name? Right. And it was personal because what he was doing wasn't just denigrating Ali. Mm-hmm. He was saying your choices you made were problematic.
Yep.
And we don't like your choices.
Yep.
Right? We don't like the choice you made.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're angry because you should be grateful for the role we gave you.
Yep.
Jesus.
And you are dishonoring the role we assigned you.
That's right.
By saying there's more depth to me than your definition. I have the right to choose how you address me.
Yeah.
See, and it's a deeper conversation. So if people, class saying, well, his mama named him Clay, I'm going to name him Clay. It wasn't about that. Right. What Muhammad Ali was doing wasn't about that. Right. And I never forget, and this has nothing to do with it. I know we're gonna wrap up. We're going to go over a little bit, y'all, tonight. So, in fact, I'm going to just say this. Some folk said that when we ended, we should have kept going.
Oh.
Let me give them what they want.
Yeah. So let's just give them what they want. I'm just, I can't take a stand for myself. I'm just gonna give them. I'm gonna capitulate to the demands and requests. But I'm gonna yield my right to stand on my timetable tonight.
Reclaiming my time.
Yes.
Reclaiming my
Yes.
time.
The Lord has made me.
Right.
All right, let me stop it. But I don't know why this is in my head now, because I feel like when I say y'all gonna do something with this, but Ken Norton said that his son, Ken Norton Jr., that his wife, when his wife left him, he fought to keep his son, who we know ended up playing professional football as a coach in the NFL now, assistant coach, I believe, still. And he said that they were poor, had no money. He called his father, this Ken Norton, the boxer, to see if he come stay with him. He said his father said, no. If I let you come stay, you'll never find your own way.
Wow.
He said, and I was hurt. He said, I had these fights that were paying me minimal money, 200 here, 150 here. He said, and all of a sudden he got a shot to fight Muhammad Ali and beat Muhammad Ali, broke his jaw. And he said, this is Ken Norton. And he said he had a car accident, so he had all kind of issues, brain damage, but he's still talking now. And it wasn't because of boxing. He was in a car accident. He said, I have to thank Muhammad Ali. The opportunity he gave me changed my life. Wow. I was able to feed my son because of the fight. Right? So, and all the thing was that all the boxers, except for one, which was Joe Frazier, but talked about how, watch this, how the fight and the opportunity changed the trajectory of their lives. I don't know why I said that, but I don't know why that came. But I guess what I really want to, what I could connect it to is there are some people that Alicia lifted this, that we look at in this country, in our culture, and we don't realize that they are an opportunity away.
You brought it in.
Away.
That was a rope-a-dope.
You saw that?
Just
you saw
did.
That?
That was a rope-a-dope.
I pulled you in? Okay, I pulled you.
That was a rope-a-dope.
I did the Ali. I did the move. But people who we label,
Yeah.
right? Who we try to dismiss are an opportunity away.
Yeah.
And maybe being human is not just about fighting against policy. Maybe it's creating opportunity.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the work we do. Maybe that's the role we play. That we help create opportunity. We help create spaces, right? Where the trajectory of people's lives can shift.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is when people who are the beneficiaries of opportunities and have experienced the shifting of their trajectory, then use language that suggests they forgot the opportunity they got.
Right.
Yep.
To put distance between
Distance.
themselves.
Yeah.
And think that you can dress up
That's good.
or you can somehow, shuffle around your personal narrative. I'm using the boxing analogy still. But I think that's important. And there's a lot of things we want to talk about. But I want to shift in the time I want to shift this because it's important. Because you raised it. We are in a mental health crisis in this country. And even with the attempts that we're going to send the police in and mental health workers in, I don't even know what that means. Yeah. What does that mean? Right. So if I'm having a mental crisis and you're the therapist and you're the police officer who comes to me, I wonder, has anyone ever asked, how is this going to work?
Right. I don't think anyone has asked. I think that the reality is that the one in crisis is criminalized, and that the language and the promises of mental health support are supposed to somehow soften
Yeah, there it is.
the way we hear
There it is.
what's really happening. And I am deeply concerned for the criminalization of poverty.
Yes.
I'm deeply concerned for it because what are the effects of that?
Yeah.
How much more violence can we tolerate? Are we willing to tolerate?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll say this, I frankly do not care for swagger politics.
Lord have mercy.
And that's what I feel like we have right now, where there are pronouncements with no accountability.
Woo!
And then you leave.
Man, you made my glasses fall different then.
You make a pronouncement, you leave.
Right.
It sounds good, but there's no
Right,
accountability.
right.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the quandary you just presented. When the police officer and the mental health expert come together, what's to occur?
Right.
And who's accountable?
Right. And I think there's something very telling, because I imagine that on the 2 train on 125th Street, someone on the downtown side, someone is having a mental crisis. And the image of someone who is trained to approach and talk to someone with having a mental health crisis and the police.
At the same time.
At the same time, right? So what it tells me is exactly what we have already named, is that the presence of the police is that it is a criminal matter.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't a criminal matter, why are you here?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that double image tells me that the city is schizophrenic.
Woo! I'm right here. I'm right out here.
Well, folks, it's been a fantastic evening.
But you're right to underscore
Woo.
what that
Hold on.
image.
You ain't gonna just drop that and run somewhere else. Nah. The city. Schizophrenia.
This is projection.
Right.
Social schizophrenia. Political schizophrenia.
Yeah, there it is.
That's it. Political schizophrenia, Doc. There is a triple-mindedness about so much that happens. It's like 3-card Monte politics.
Yeah.
Over here.
Yeah.
Look here, but here. It's all the time. It's get us leaning one way, right? While the real prize, and the prize politically is the sustaining of power.
Yeah.
Not the shifting of trajectory,
Yep.
the shifting of the narrative, or even of the alleviation of poverty.
Yes. That's
It
right.
is the maintenance of power.
Yep.
And we use, right, these catchphrases, these political footballs seasonally, right, when they're convenient for the sake of political gain.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to name that.
Yep.
Now, let's be real. We can't use that, though, as justification for disengagement.
Right.
We have to use it as fuel for wanting more accountability.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the key, because the last thing we can afford to do is what those in power want us to do, and that is to disengage and to not hold those accountable. In this system, the citizens have the right to hold elected officials accountable without the assumption that they're going to do what they were elected to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to make them do this, right? And the problem is that countless people are suffering in the midst, I love what you said, in the midst of swagger politics. I ain't heard that phrase nowhere else.
Bruh,
But probably because the folk who could say it ain't free enough to say it.
They saying it in the break room.
Right.
Or the green room.
In the
Or the
green
green
room.
room.
But not on the screen, right?
No.
Wow.
Don't do that.
That's it, Reverend. That's it.
That's the, and the mental health issue now is so prevalent. And let me go deeper. Here's my discovery. I've been on some panels recently and some conversations with some enlightened people. Ain't a whole lot of light in these conversations now. Because what I realize is that we make the assumption that that some of the people we look to have actually helped construct the mechanisms of healing.
Yes. Yes.
And it has not happened.
Yeah.
Man, y'all body slamming me tonight, man. This is good stuff. I hope you all who are watching, I don't know if you feel the same way I do, because I feel like the ground has moved a little bit under my feet. But I think it's critical. It's how I'm gonna move to two things, but I shared this with Alicia earlier, and you as well. And let's take, for example, the fact that statistics say that there's been a 29% increase in black women who died during pregnancy or during childbirth. And yet, there's also a 44% increase among, Latina population who died during pregnancy or childbirth. Why is that narrative important to talk about today? And press it. It's 2022.
Mm-hmm.
The level of medical technology we have at our disposal should minimize that. But why is it still happening? Why are black and brown women dying during pregnancy, dying during childbirth in these alarming numbers? Why is that still happening?
It's a great question. I can't help but wonder if it carries us back to earlier conversations about language and narratives. Ideas that black and brown women can bear more pain
My God.
than white women.
Woo.
This kind of experimental ethic that medical science takes toward black and brown women. We've got a long history of that kind of exploitation, and it seems not to be abated. There's a lot of conversation about healthcare disparity, but not a lot of movement at all.
No.
And what I have discovered is that these disparities are very convenient as rhetoric for white institutions around February.
Woo.
My God.
Wait a minute.
Because they can talk
Yeah.
about justice matters now. There's something to talk about. There's a healthcare disparity. But if the disparities dissolve,
March 1st.
Baby. When the clock strikes 12.
March 1st.
that's what I'm talking about.
Back to the regularly scheduled program.
There you go.
Here's a thought that just came to my mind. You
Boy.
said that so well. Is that there is money to be made in the disparity.
Yes.
That gap of disparity, that's where the money is, right?
Yep.
Right. So when we think about it, reminds me of Dorothy Roberts, professor that I've read, whose work is like embodied in my work as a nonprofit leader for Black single mothers. What you doing?
I'm just having my own moment.
Okay. She talks so much about this. What was the language you just used? But it made me bring to about eugenics. She kind of frames this around this notion of eugenics and about black and brown women who are dying.
Yeah.
Right. And that there is. Well, you ask the question very simply, like, why does this continue to happen? There's multiple reasons, but there's no money to be made in the wellness of black and brown women.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
There's not, right? There's no money to be made.
There's no money to be made
No.
in the wellness of black and brown women.
No. And from
Lord have mercy.
And I'll put on my nonprofit hat, organizations, institutions, colleges, these medical boards having all these conversations about health disparities about black and brown women, and we actually see the gap. We see these increases of 26%,
29% and 44%
29 and 44%. It's so insidiousness because we use these numbers from a nonprofit institutional perspective as an indicator that we have more work to do. But what happens when we flip that on its head and say that those numbers are indicator that you're not doing enough work?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's an indicator because my notion is, and I've said this to churches, I've said this to nonprofits, is that you will know when you are doing good work when people no longer need your services.
Right. Right.
You
Right?
work yourself out of necessity.
When you
Yep.
work yourself out of necessity,
Yep.
right? And so I think it's so important for us to just call a thing when it comes to this, is that those numbers are increasing is because there's money to be made
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
disparity gap.
Ooh.
Somebody's profiting.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's understanding that, man, that, whew.
Everybody
here's the
stands
thing.
to make money. Insurance companies,
Yeah.
hospitals, everybody stands to make money.
that
If
they
these
haven't-
numbers were associated with white women,
Baby, it'll be on the 5 o'clock news every day.
a crisis, a
Across the
national crisis.
Right.
Well, hold on. We got a great example of that.
What's that?
Crack and opioid. guys.
Yep, there you go.
There it is.
about to
Yep.
say that.
In the 80s, the criminalization of sickness.
Yep.
Now, rehabilitation.
Listen, let me tell you, you remember in Atlanta, probably about, I don't know, up in Johns Creek, if you don't, you're not familiar, very
Oh, yeah.
wealthy
Oh, yeah.
part of metro Atlanta. And these
I was about
kids
to
were
say something
getting
about that, but
what?
I'm waiting till later, off camera.
But these kids were getting their hands on opioids. I'll never forget. I was
Yeah.
still living in Atlanta at the time. And I will never forget, Channel 2 Action News did like a 8 p.m. evening special about the increase of opioids in our communities. And they had all the best reporters and doctors and these children, these families who were so broken. And I said, well, I remember in 92
there you go.
in East Atlanta,
There you go.
right? Where the narrative was not how do we help, how do we resource, how do we impart, it was how do we criminalize, how do we
Lock
lock up,
'em up.
how do we create policies like one strike, right?
Lord, I did a piece for, I think it was a Huffington Post or one of those, and I wrote, but what I talked about, Doc, was the racialization of compassion.
I'll throw these flowers.
The racialization of compassion. Inner city, black and brown people addicted to crack,
Yeah.
criminals.
Yep.
White people in the Ozarks, they need healing.
Right,
We ought to show compassion.
that's right.
Yeah.
The
They're struggling with
idea that
opioids.
compassion is the language
The
changes.
language.
good.
The language.
That's
See?
the language.
Yep.
Hold on, opioids.
Right.
Oh, you mean compounded heroin?
Right.
Exactly.
Opioids.
Right.
Call a thing a thing.
Call it. Look. Now I'm gonna tell you, you can. Boy, look, we talked about language earlier, right? There's something disgusting about crack.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
But opioids.
Opioids.
Just the way the tone.
The tone changes.
Opioids.
We have a national opioid crisis in our country, and we must address it. And it must be met with healing and ways to rehabilitate those. You a crackhead.
Right.
Crack.
Yeah, because opioid head don't quite.
It don't. Yeah.
don't quite do
Opioid
that.
don't make
Same
you.
ring.
Yeah.
It's have the same ring. Too.
Opioid will make you feel like, Lord, you will say opioids. What are they talking about? Pills? Right? No, man. They talked about in certain parts of West Virginia how those who were addicted to opioids would climb poles and get strip the copper wiring to sell it to get money
Yep. Yep.
for opioids.
Yep.
But when somebody's cousin
Right.
broke into the house
Right.
and stole the microwave to get crack, throw him in jail.
Yep.
Right.
This language, it always goes back to language in this culture. And I want us to always be mindful of those who are watching. We always find ourselves coming back to language because language is used in some very divisive ways.
Weaponized.
And the not just the construction, but the fabrication of language at times is critical. Listen, folks, I want to stay on longer, but here's what I want to, we're not over yet, because y'all done told us to keep it going. I'm going to name the person who told me that actually. Deacon Laverne King said that y'all should keep on talking, and she told me that last week.
Oh, don't call
So,
her out.
I'm gonna call out. So, and she's in the building now. So I'm in the name of Deacon King. We're gonna keep going a few more minutes. All right. Here's what I want to do. I want to close out this. Now, we're approaching, and you mentioned it, the end of Black History Month. Now, I said last week that we black every month.
Air month.
Say it again?
Air month.
Every month.
Decatur, Eastern
Yeah. But
What?
in February,
Yes.
we blackity black.
Black, 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 black.
All right. Say that black.
Black, 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 black,
See,
black.
You can't get that accent. That's at the kid.
It's somebody.
It is.
It's somebody.
It
The
is.
hand
Gotta
gestures
know.
too. See, the
I-
hand gestures
Ain't
go
I
with
got
it.
you see?
Can I tell you? Everything moved. Everything changed.
They be like, Reverend, this
Your
is the real
personality
me,
shifted.
okay?
Your whole
I tone it down for y'all.
Yeah. Can I give you a joke though about that? My freshman year, when I went to Atlanta, my first time down south, I never been down south until I had to go to Morehouse. All right, I had no family down south, so we didn't no need to go down south. My mother, we went down there to get stuff for my dorm, hangers and all that stuff. This is really, I'm not being, this is real. This is showing the difference because you remind me of this. So I walk in, we go in the, I don't even know what store it was, but I know we had to buy, like bins and hangers and all that stuff. So I get the check. I said, "You want all this?" I said, "What?"
Baby, if we don't do nothing else, we're gonna run some words together.
Look. I said, "Excuse me. You want all this?" I said, and she got mad because she thought I was being funny.
Right.
I said, "What did you say?" "Do you want all of this?" And I realized, now here's the funny thing. After about 3 months in Atlanta, I was saying the same thing. You want all this?
Yeah.
It was, so my people. But listen,
Yeah.
it's Black History Month. So, give me a person, not even two, just give me a person who, and it's hard, alive and who passed on, who you think are critical. And I'm going to start with Alicia.
I guess.
Yes.
So I want to name Hope Wollensack. She is a black woman in Georgia who implemented one of the first basic income programs, universal basic income programs in the state of Georgia for black women. They are giving women $850 a month over the course of 2 years. And I had an opportunity to talk to her about that initiative, really just asking some really critical questions about, one, how do you pull off a multi-million-dollar initiative like that in a state like Georgia? And two, what are the lasting impacts of that type of work? And I'll tell you what she said. She said, there's no way of really knowing what the long-term impact for these black women across 6 geographical areas in Georgia. But when I think about black history, I think, we often default to these historical figures and very rightly so. But there are people who are making history.
Every day.
Who are, and let me not even, language, not even making history, they are making impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They are having a real impact whose work and whose work will ultimately be historical. But I want to just lift her name up. She's the executive director of the Growth Fund. The program is called In Her Hands, and she's just doing fantastic work. So when I think about Black History Month, when I think about the roles women have played, right, in our history, I just want to lift her name up as someone who is young, living well, who's making an impact, and that's my Black History fact for the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's excellent.
Maurice?
So I want to call the name of someone who was important to my youth and formation, and someone I have to give some credit for affirming my interest in scholarly stuff. This gentleman is the late Dr. George T. Stansberry. He's a graduate of Morgan State University in Baltimore. He did his medical degree at Howard. And from the time I was born until well past the time I left to go to college, he was the only black physician in the entire county I lived in, which is Harford County, Maryland, just 40 minutes northeast of Baltimore. And it wasn't just that he was the only one, but I know how he accommodated patients who couldn't pay. I know how he made things happen for people who otherwise wouldn't have access to more serious health care in the city. right, into Baltimore. You had to have a way in. So here's a local doctor who was also a local hero for a lot of black people in the community I grew up in. And I just want to call his name George T. Stansberry. My younger sister is a psychologist. She has an office in Durham. And she calls her office the gathering space, right?
I love
but
it.
she wanted to call it the gathering space because it includes his initials, right? She wanted to honor him, GTS, right?
And she
These are
spelled
his
it. She spelled
initials. She spelled
course
McGrath,
she's
that's
spelling
right. But again, there's some activity going on in my hometown this month that is honoring him.
Wow.
And he was close to me and my family. He was someone who just delighted in young people and their aspirations. And we don't have very many Dr. George T. Stansberrys anymore.
You know, I had one name I was going to share, but I must keep it in the spirit. Person has passed on, but both of you said something, impact. You said it, and it's not. My elementary school principal, his name was Charles McElwain, black man. And I, as a young man, took for granted the idea of seeing black men in those positions. And what it said to me without understanding what it was saying to me.
Yeah.
To see him walk around the halls every day with his suit on. And the funny thing was, under his suit sleeve, he had a little paddle. You know, this ain't nowadays. This is back in the days. That he would slip out if somebody got out of hand. But he was a graduate of Tuskegee University. He recruited teachers. Many of the black teachers in my elementary school were graduates of HBCUs. But that's not why I want to lift him up. He was a principal of a elementary school in the predominantly black community, and we also had many white teachers in the school who were not part of the community, who came in to teach. My kindergarten teacher was white. My first grade teacher was white. My second grade teacher was white. My sixth grade teacher was white. My third grade teacher was black, my fourth grade teacher was black, and my fifth grade teacher was white. In a predominantly black. Now we would say, oh, something's wrong. Let me tell you why. My first grade teacher, Miss Horowitz, a Jewish woman, taught me the lyrics to Young, Gifted, and Black. He had the white teachers teach black history, not just in February, year round. It was a white teacher, fifth grade, who taught us the lyrics to lift every voice and sing. And I didn't understand how important that was until years down the road. That here was a black principal in a school with white teachers who had to teach black history to teach in his school.
Wow.
So it wasn't a February thing.
Yeah.
It was year round. I didn't understand what a feat that was. You know, what it did. But there were countless people like the doctor, like the sister who's alive, like my principal, who had impact.
Yes.
Impact.
Yes.
Had no idea the power they had, the profound impact on our lives as young people.
Yeah.
And the impact she's having now on young mothers and young black women.
Yeah.
That is far-reaching. And I'll close with this. I pray, and it's hard in this social media-driven climate, I pray that we can get to a point where we choose impact over impressiveness.
Yeah. Say it again, Reverend.
Where we can choose to be impactful and not just impressive.
That's good.
Impressive is fleeting. But we all sit here today as a benefactor of people who had great impact on our lives. That should be an aim.
That's good.
That we live our lives in such a way that we have lasting impact. Our impact should always outlast our breath.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Right? Always. We can all right now name 5, 7, 10 people who are no longer here, but we embody their impact. That's what it's about. It don't matter if people think if you're an influencer. All right, let me stop. I'm sorry, because I want to be impactful.
Yeah.
I want to be impactful, and that's the aim, that we live our lives in such a way that we are impactful. And I pray, beloved, that tonight's conversation was impactful.
Yeah.
And that it helped. We'll be back.
When we coming back?
May. We'll be back in May.
Let's do it.
And we're gonna make sure consistently we come back every quarter. Because you can't say you want to have empowering conversations and not consistently have them.
Yeah.
Empowerment is about sustained engagement.
Yeah.
You know, I like the fact that sirens are going off right now.
Yeah.
We're talking about impact and empowering. So we'll be back. This team will be back in May to pick up some conversations. We're going to expand even the what we talk about. But listen, I got to tell you both, as always, thank you for this, because this is always empowering for me personally, honestly. Thank you, because at the end of the day, here's what I love. When we're together, that we're secure enough in who we are, that we allow ourselves to sharpen one another.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That we can also celebrate one another's genius
Yes.
That's it.
without
That's it.
craving it.
That's good.
That means something.
That's awesome.
That means something, that we can celebrate one another without wanting to be one another. That means we're secure.
That's good.
Doesn't mean we're perfect, but we're secure. So thank you all both, because
Thank
this
you.
has been amazing. It's always amazing. It's been more amazing because we've been together in person. The energy just even felt different. If the energy came through the screen when we were doing Extreme, when this energy is good. So listen, I also want to thank you all who've been watching.
Thank you.
Because, you know, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Well, no, let me take that back. We would talk anyway. We would talk anyway. But thank you for allowing us to present our conversation in this format, this public format. Thank you for tuning in tonight to Empowering Conversations. Again, thank you to Reverend Alicia Gordon, Dr. Maurice Wallace, for this space. We thank you for FCBC. We thank you,
FCBC.
Thank
we
you.
thank FCBC. We thank those who contributed to tonight. Our media person, Sister Whitney Johnson. We thank Vartech, Brother Ian Cumberpatch. We thank all those in the building. Sister Tamish, who's here. We thank the deacons who are here. Deacon King, Deacon Darnell. Thank my assistant, Sharon, for being here tonight. Everybody who made tonight possible, thank you all for helping for this moment. And we will be back in May. And until we meet again, we live, we love, we serve. Much love, peace, and many blessings, beloved.